And good afternoon, everybody. It's one of the best times of year for racing. It is a Breeders' Cup time, and everybody's looking for a little bit of insight. Everybody's looking for a little bit of analysis. Everybody's looking for a little bit of help, maybe something that you can find that somebody else might not be able to find for the Breeders' Cup. So myself, Jim Miller, and Emily Gullikson are here to try to help you out and see what we can do to try to guide you to those horses that might be able to get you across the line first for the Breeders' Cup. First off, Emily, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. And like you said, this is like the greatest time of the year for horse players. It's the World Championship. It lives up to its name every year. And I think the racing this year is great. A lot of quality horses, a lot of competitive races, and even some superstars. So, yeah, excited to dive in and talk to you about these races.
Yeah, the one cool thing that I always tell everybody about with the Breeders' Cup is kind of the World Series of horse racing, but it's one of the few times in the year that you can find graded stakes winners that are going to be 10, 12, 15, 20, 30 to 1, because every race is full of graded stakes winners. That's what you see for the Breeders' Cup. The other thing I really like is you get that mix of not only West Coast going to East, that touch of the Midwest, but then the Euros, especially in those turf races, Emily. And one of the things we talked about leading into the Breeders' Cup was the wagering format and some really cool wagers for the Breeders' Cup. On Friday, they're doing an all-turf pick 3. On Saturday, they're doing an all-turf pick 4. And this first video, we're going to focus on, is that all-turf pick 3 on Friday? And Emily, first off, I want to ask you, because we play races differently when you're playing, say, for your own pocketbook compared to a tournament and that. But the first thing you see that jumps out with this pick 3 is that it's a $3 wager. So what were your thoughts on that initially?
Yeah, it's, you do have to kind of think investment wise and how you're going to play it, and looking at your outcome, and kind of having that in your mind, right? Kind of going into the sequence of what it's going to pay, and especially starting off with these Friday races that are all juvenile. The juvenile races, they're on the turf, they're big full fields, so you have this balance of, is it going to be formful, is it going to be chaotic, is it going to be a little bit of both? And then anytime that you are doing a sequence, it's a lot different than a who do you like, right? Because you're also trying to be different than who does everybody else like. So there's a lot of moving parts that go into this, and putting your tickets together as you start talking these races.
Yeah, and the cool thing about it, I got a glance at your tickets ahead of time. We agree in some parts and don't agree in others. There's chances that we could actually both hit this pick 3, but there's other times where we might be far apart. And that's the cool thing about handicapping these races, Emily, because there's so many things that come involved. You get your buyer speed figures through the daily racing form, your time form figures that you're going to see for the overseas races. But then again, it's West Coast, East Coast, some horses trying turf for the first time. When it's juvenile races, it's really wide open. And a lot of times it just comes down to watching videos and seeing what you can take from those races as well. So I know you and I were both talking about it, that we're seeing a lot of videos, watching a whole lot of races and that, and leading into these races, it seems like you can do so much homework, but you don't want to overanalyze either. So when you're trying to break down a race, especially a juvenile race, kind of what is your strategy just going into it initially?
Yeah, I mean, my process pretty much remains the same. I mean, I watch races, the team at Optics, we all watch races. So every single horse that's running the entire Breeders' Cup card, especially for these Breeders' Cup races, these are horses that we followed on video since the beginning, or we're catching up on them on video, when available. It can be a little bit tough at times, but for the most part, all that video work is done. And it's especially crucial with the juveniles because, if you're talking about speed figures, you have just like a limited sample, lightly raced horses, and they're lightly raced horses that are developing, and what goes into that speed figure could determined by the way the track played, by the way the race shape played out. Was that a regression performance? Was that a top? What kind of factors went in there? And those are things that you can really only see from video. So yeah, video is a big part of my handicapping, especially for this sequence.
Yeah, and I'm with you as well. One of the cool things about having the Club Hawthorne app, Emily, is it does have so many of these races that you can go back and see the replays on, because we're not only showing the North American races, so much international racing on there as well. So it really is a great resource. Like you mentioned, you have the Optics plots and the whole team at Optics too. And we're going to talk about some of the plots in some of our later videos when we're breaking down some of the other races. But let's jump into the sequence, Emily. The first race here for this All Friday Pick 3 is the 6th race at Keeneland. It's the Juvenile Turf Sprint, 5.5 furlongs here. You look up and down this field, and it's an interesting race because you get a mix of Euros and a mix of American horses. And you and I kind of both had some different thoughts in some portions, but some similar thoughts in others. So I started with Love Reigns, a horse that we both have on the ticket. So let's start by looking at this one first, the 2-horse. What did you see out of Love Reigns from the barn of Wesley Ward?
Well, I mean, she has class, she has form over this course, and she has speed, and that is really key in these races. I mean, these turf sprints, especially, trip can just make or break a horse. So being on the inside, having early speed, having class, and then just in terms of, maybe even a little bit of value, right? Because as far as Love Reigns, Dramatized, and the Platinum Queen listed as the morning line favorite. We'll have to see how that actually plays out. But they all ran together at Ascot. And so it was kind of, keying off that race. I mean, as far as intention, Love Reigns was entered on October 9th at Keeneland in a restricted stake. So running her fresh in the spot, having Ortiz aboard, regular riders, these types of things, then having connections that this is kind of their game plan. So I thought as far as Love Reigns, I thought she was, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes these races can be a little bit chaotic. I thought that she made sense and was very logical.
Yeah, and the one thing that I like that you mentioned too, you said she numerous times because there are numerous fillies in this race that are facing the boys. And oftentimes you tend to wonder if that's going to be a little bit of a challenge for some of these horses, especially younger horses. But this is a very talented trio of fillies. They could all be in the mix. Love Reigns, one of those, where Wesley Ward definitely knows what he's doing. I mean, he thought enough of this horse to bring it over to race at Ascot before coming back. It was a really good effort, I thought, in that last out at Saratoga. It's a horse that I think, just kind of looking at your ticket, you have to have on the ticket. So Love Reigns, a horse that we both are going to have at least on our ticket for the pick 3. Now, another horse that you have here in the mix that I didn't have, but I want to kind of kick it over to you because of the value, comes with the 7. That's Oxymore. This is a horse that could be a factor from the barn of trainer Chad Brown. What do you see in Oxymore in here?
Actually, that isn't what I have on my ticket.
Oh, it's not.
But no.
Oh, no, you didn't. You had the 2. That's right. You had the 2 and then the 4, 5, 6. I was looking at the wrong thing there.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Yeah, I mean, it could be a horse that people do like because there are some sprint form. One of the things I didn't like about Oxymore was just kind of declining figures, but I could see that horse being one that people do play based on the connections.
Well, good. And hey, and here's the good thing about it, and the beauty of kind of doing things online on StreamYard. Hey, we make mistakes. Watch, somebody's going to throw that horse on there, and they'll probably hit the wager. All right, now I'm looking at your correct ticket. The other horses you have there are the 4, 5, and 6. You mentioned Dramatized. I like that this is a horse that could be a factor here. I love the Euros all the time in races coming in over here for the Breeders' Cup because they always seem to run really well. Ryan Moore is the one that's riding this horse. But then the one right next to it is the one that I was interested in. That was the 5, Mischief Magic. William Buick rides this one today. This is a horse that I think seems to be improving. What do you see out of Mischief Magic in this spot?
Yeah, I kind of saw the same thing. I mean, sort of a developing type horse. My one slight concern with him is just as far as this distance, because watching him, he's kind of a bigger type. I think kind of that 6 furlongs is probably the most ideal, but he has that strong late kick. So if I'm kind of looking at this field where it's like I'm looking at Love Reigns as being a contender on the front end, if she gets beat, it's probably not necessarily going to be from another horse trying to duel, is sort of the way I'm playing it. That Mischief Magic with that late kick. But that is kind of my one concern, is maybe the distance is a little bit short. But again, you have solid connections, a horse that's in form and has that foundation.
Yeah, definitely the value too of watching those replays, because you read the comment. It says held up and rare in that last out for the comment. I mean, you talk about held up. This horse had to steady pretty hard early on and kind of dropped out of it, and then came on late and came on a little bit too late. And like you said, clear sailing is kind of the key for some of these late closers, especially in these sprints. So Mischief Magic, a horse that should be in the mix. We'll just have to see kind of what the trip is. Now, Frankie Dettori always seems to have an impact in the Breeders' Cup. He's riding Persian Force in here. This is a horse that could be in a chasing spot. This is a horse that's also sitting at 15-1 in here. If you're looking for value in the race, Emily, maybe you found it with this horse.
Yeah, it was a horse that I kind of had to just leave in based on the class, because he's who he's been running against in those races. And it just could be one of those horses that has a class edge at a big price. Blackbeard would probably be the standout in here if they didn't retire that one early. And as far as Persian Force, I really, watching his videos, I wanted to see more from him. So there really isn't anything like, as far as an individual, that I just sort of fell in love with, more than it being the price and just the races that he's coming out of and having that foundation.
All right, so we're going to cover those are the horses that we've covered in there. I mean, we'll get to our ticket in a little bit, Emily, but you have a couple of different tickets. Actually like the way you played them. One ticket you single on the front end, another ticket you single on the tail end. We'll touch on that shortly. One other thing I want to mention about the sprints, because when we're watching replays, you're watching a lot of these races overseas. These sprint races are down the straight, and it's a straight the whole way through. Do you think it's a concern for any of these horses? Do you worry a little bit about post draw for some of these, just because you have to make the turn there at Keeneland, either far outside or inside? I know you mentioned a little bit out of Love Reigns. You kind of have to get away from that two hole a little bit. Does it concern you at all with these horses coming out of races on the straight and having to make the turn in here?
I mean, you're going to have, like I mentioned earlier, it's a big full field of lightly raced types. I mean, so much could happen. The break is key, getting that position in there. As you mentioned, some of these riders that are just so experienced. And not only do we have the world-class horses, but we have the world-class jockeys. And, yeah, I mean, their racing luck comes into play, positional speed, but some of that stuff, as a handicapper, it's so out of your control, right? It's like you
Yep.
can kind of play those scenarios out. You're just kind of like, Love Reigns, she's on the inside, she's got early speed. At least she's going to be kind of out in front, that kind of Golden Pal type,
Yep.
scenario, the way I'm kind of looking at it. And then some of these other horses are going to have to work a trip, whether they're getting cover and coming off late, or for those horses on the outside, where they're going to go, whether it's to take back to try to get some safe ground or get caught wide. So yeah, I mean, trip definitely comes into play.
Yep. So we'll see how things go. Hopefully we can both be alive after the first leg of the pick three, because you go on to that second leg. It's the Juvenile Fillies turf. It's 1 mile on the turf. We should mention, by the way, weather looks like it's not going to be a factor at all this weekend at Keeneland. Looks like it's going to be beautiful temperatures in the 70s. Plan on fast and firm. Now, this was the one race, Emily, where we differed quite a bit on our tickets. So looking up and down the field here, I'm curious to see what the pace scenario is in this race, because I didn't see a ton of early pace in here. And that was the thing that scared me with some of these horses. I think it's probably the reason why you have one of these horses, or even a couple here in the mix. But Pleasant Passage, a horse that sits here at 12-1 in this spot. So a horse coming in off a good win, comes from the barn of Shug McGahee, lightly raced, but hasn't really done anything wrong. And I thought that was a horse that could be in the mix.
Yeah, I definitely have her in the mix. I mean, she comes out of that common race with Be Your Best, yep, and the Chad Brown horses, the Free Look, Last Call, right? No,
yep,
Free
yep.
Look. I had it
Free
right.
Free Look. Yep.
Yeah, they're all coming out of that common race, and Pleasant Passage just had such a look off her debut. It was very classy effort. Showed a lot of grit, and just looked like one that was going to benefit from racing and more ground. And based on there was some weather that day, they went to the front, so she was able to kind of show she can get out on the front, and was pretty classy in that effort. She's not necessarily the lead type, but has that versatility. I just thought that race overall was quality. I mean, Free Look is one I think that you have and I don't have, and it's, yep, it's interesting because you bring up, we have some different opinions, and in many ways we don't necessarily have different opinions. It's just more of a different strategy, right? So I could have easily used Free Look, but I decided to go with Pleasant Passage, and then Be Your Best, who also comes out of that same race, the Miss Grillo, who was actually favored that day, and her first two races were very impressive, and just didn't think that was kind of the right setup for her. So just, as far as value is the one that I'm going to use along with Pleasant Passage from that race.
Yeah, like you mentioned, I mean, a little bit different look at our numbers, but kind of a similar look at the fact that we know that's the key race, looking at the Miss Grillo. That's a race that these horses that came out of that race all should be factors in here. So definitely worth the look. And if you have a chance to go back at the replay, watch the replay, take a look at it and just kind of see what you think, because you look at some of the comments in the stretch. I mean, they're talking about the winner and the second place finisher, and they're coming together in the lane, bumping a little. Maybe they brushed a little bit. You can make your own determination on what your feeling is and how much that affected the chances of Free Look there late in the lane in that spot. Now, the other one that you had in here is on the outside. Basil Martini, 15-1 in this spot. This is a horse that might be coming into form at the right time. So what did you think of this one at a bit of a price?
Well, yeah, it really was the bit of a price. But as far as, our note takers that have been following this horse, they've just noted that she wants more ground, and getting that added ground today. So it's like, we learn all the time, you got to trust your data. And so if the data is saying that, and it's a horse that's 15-1, and it's information that's maybe not necessarily in the public space, it's just a horse I'm going to use. So that was the angle there. And I mean, she's going to definitely be overlooked because it's not only the morning line, but from that 14 post that scares a lot of people away. So yeah, it's one I'm keeping in the mix just as a long shot that's not without a chance.
Yeah, and definitely. I mean, again, the Euros always are going to be factors. A Euro 15 to 1 on the turf, definitely worth the look as well. For me, I have Mediate in the mix as well. Ryan Moore rides this one today. The thing I was really curious about was the horse raced on September 11th, came right back on September the 24th. So just a 13-day turnaround in between those starts. Now you get a little bit over a month in between races. So that's something that I kind of liked out of this horse coming in here. Again, it's a horse that's faced some larger fields, but it's also a horse that you have to wonder if it's going to need to get that distance or wants that distance. So that's going to be the big question mark. But that's the thing you run into too. A lot of these juvenile horses that are racing overseas might not have gotten a lot of those longer distance races. So it's that choice. Do you go 3/4, 7/8 of a mile, or are you going really stretching out around 2 turns? And sometimes 2 turns there is kind of a bob and a weave all the way around a course to find your way to the wire. So see how things unfold there in the juvenile Fillies turf.
One
All right,
more thing I want to I'll add
yeah.
on Mediate. There's a couple things. She's not one that I dislike by any means. It really
Sure.
came down to ticket structure for her, because I have absolutely no knocks on her. I think that she's legitimate. I just didn't want to go short price, short price, short price all the way
Yeah.
through. But the other thing I do want to note, maybe people aren't aware of, is Aiden O'Brien has mentioned that they might put cheek pieces on her for this race. So she hasn't worn them in the past, and she might wear them for this race. So if you see him out there, that is something that the barn has noted.
Yeah, and it's something too that you tend to wonder, okay, any type of equipment change when you're going into a major race, how is a horse going to react? You're almost rolling the dice, hoping that it's going to work out well. And then I'm sure they've kind of tested things out ahead of time and works and that and gallops leading up to it, but definitely a very good point there. All right, the last race of that pick 3, Emily, is the juvenile turf. Again, a 1 mile in here. You're looking at this race, and there is a horse that you seem to like a lot, that I seem to like a lot, and you talked about it. It comes to ticket structure sometimes. It's Silver Knot in here. This one sits at 3 to 1. I would be overjoyed, Emily, if we got 3 to 1 on Silver Knot, because I think this is a very, very good racehorse, and apparently you think the same as well.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't think we're alone. This horse is going to be a very short price, and I think this horse is going to be very heavily used on every single ticket. So yeah, that really came in structure. And another one, just no knocks, developing top connections. This horse, Silver Knot, is the horse to beat in this race without question.
Yeah, and Silver Knot, just going back through, I mean, I've been watching some of those races there, and it seems like every single time out, the horse just seems to be improving a little bit. It wasn't the best of trips really in that last out either, and the horse kind of overcame things, kind of got bottled up a little bit early on, had to determine what they wanted to do. But when this horse got into the clear, just absolutely took off. And that's the thing about it. This mile trip, I like the 4-hole. It's a good draw. But again, when there's 14 in there, you really have to get away in good order, and you have to kind of try to work out a trip. Now, I did notice the way you constructed tickets, because you did put 2 tickets together, there were 2 other horses that you used in this race. Both of them were big price plays, because you were able to single earlier. So it was 2 outside horses there. Was it Reckoning Forest and Mustache? Were those the 2 that you threw on there as well?
Yes. Those are the 2. So as far as Reckoning Force, another horse that's he's progressive race to race. And going back to watching the Bourbon, you could really make an excuse for that. So the fact that the horse was able to improve in his 4th start and then didn't have the trip to run his best race tells me that there's a move forward there. So yes, he does have the big challenge of Silver Knot, but knowing that this horse does have a move forward in him, chaos comes out, he could be the horse, and does have the experience over the course. As far as Mustache, this is typically not a horse that I like these closing sprinters that then go stretch out. It almost seems counter, right? You think, oh, they want more ground because they're closing in the sprint, and It's not necessarily the case. But, this horse, it's really the number, what it's going to come down to, because I think this horse will be a bigger price than Reckoning Force. They're both 20 to 1 in the morning line. And he just wanted to run that day. And I think they're bringing him back and putting him in this spot because he's doing so well and just, willing. So wanting to get creative with a horse that was just so outside the box. And so that's where I landed. So, but I mean, it's, as far as, you mentioned ticket structure, that's really how it comes into play. And I know we'll talk about that.
Yeah, and that's the thing about it. And again, you talk about just some changes. Reckoning Force puts the blinkers on, so that's going to be something that's interesting as well. And I think you're right on Mustache. I think you're going to get far better even than that 20 to 1 price. You might get 30, 40 to 1. And again, a juvenile race where there could be chaos, this is a horse that could be a factor here and a horse that could come running at him late. All right, you've mentioned ticket structure, and it's something we have to take a look at. So let's take a look at our tickets for this all-turf pick 3. Again, it's a $3 wager there. And you see, you and I both decided it's not even really going out on a limb, but it's more taking a stand where you have to take a stand at spots sometimes and throw that single out there and say, let's hit that so we can spread in some other parts. And I like the way you did it. And I want you to explain to everybody why you did it too. But you have 2 tickets up here, one single in on the front end, one single in on the tail end. You could actually conceivably hit both of those tickets. Well, you couldn't because you have the 2 in the one leg, but you could put it in the mix where at least you're in a shot for both of these tickets. So what did you think for these pick 3 wagers?
Yeah. So as far as strategy, I think this is really important because you can really kind of use this template, even if you disagree with my opinion or you want to kind of go in a different way, just to kind of understand the theory of why things are done the way that they're done. But as far as race 6, as we mentioned, you could go a lot of different ways in there, and it could get to a point where you're spreading too deep. And with this $3 minimum, it just becomes too expensive. So I took a shot with, speed on the front end with the 2. If she's ready, if she's quick, she could definitely get out there and win. And then as far as the middle leg, gets that coverage with some of those horses that are a little bit more of a price. I mean, again, it's one where I could have easily put the 10 in there, a horse that you use, because I'm not against Mediate at all. But I just didn't want it to go, Love Reigns is going to be a short price. Right. Mediate's going to be a short price. And then everybody's going to be on Silver Knot to close. So I just didn't, so I had to kind of make some decisions somewhere, right? So I'm like, okay, I'm going to cut out in the middle. I'm going to have to, that's going to be my decision. And so what can happen in that first ticket scenario, if the 2 does get out there, get a little bit of chaos in the middle, I'm alive to Silver Knot, but also that chaos in the back end. And then it kind of goes the opposite way as far as the second ticket, where even though Love Reigns isn't listed on the morning line favorite, I think it's a horse that's going to be heavily used. Yeah. So there is a little bit of chaos in there, and I'm right. I have some coverage in that next leg, but then, the horse that I think is probably the most likely, the horse that everybody's going to use, is there. But at least I have a little bit of chaos in order to get to that horse, because you got to try to find some chaos somewhere, right? And so that was where I went.
Yeah, and it's funny because we each have our singles either on the front end or the tail end, yet the middle leg is the one where we don't have the agreement in there, although there's horses that we agree can be in the mix. So it's just how you're going to construct your ticket. I agree with you. I mean, the Platinum Queen in the first leg, being the favorite, being all the way on the outside, again, being a filly that's facing the boys, there's so much that could go on there that could just be a little chaotic to overcome. Love Reigns should be in the mix. That's the reason I threw Mischief Magic and Persian Forest in there. That's kind of the race that I'm hoping for a little bit of chaos. The one thing that I think is kind of the saving grace to this pick 3 sequence is that middle leg, only for the fact that I don't think there's going to be anybody that's a super short price. You might be able to hit a 4-1, 5-1, 6-1, and still get a really good return on your wager here. There's a good potential that this is the race that's sitting somewhere in that, say, 8-1 to 15-1 winner race. So you're looking at that. You see that you spread, I've spread. There's 5 horses that we have in between there. But again, when it's a $3 wager, you kind of have to determine how much you want to put into a wager in that. And everybody's playing with different bankrolls. We're trying to keep things reasonable there, Emily. And then again, on the end, we both agree with Silver Knot. I think Silver Knot's a horse that's going to be very tough in that last leg. So for everybody that's playing this pick 3 on Friday, just remember, take a look ahead of time, see if there's any scratches, see if anybody draws in. We're recording these videos on Tuesday, so if we throw a horse in there that's out on Friday, don't blame Emily and I. We're talking about this early on because we're trying to promote and get you set. But we're going to have a lot of these videos taking place. We have this one for the Friday pick 3. We're going to do a special one for the Saturday pick 4. And then we're going to cover a couple of races separately as well. So make sure you check out the Hawthorne YouTube channel, Hawthorne Racecourse on YouTube. Check out our website as well. And we're going to have some nice selections for the Breeders' Cup all weekend long, too, so you can check that out, too. But, Emily, best of luck in this all-turf pick 3, and we'll be back shortly, and we'll talk about the pick 4 on Saturday.